Hi, I'm John Mitchinson.
And I'm Andy Miller from the Backlisted podcast. Now, people always ask us how we read so many books for this show.
It's hard to talk about books if you haven't read them. We spent hours squinting at the pages of the books we have to read for our show, so we know the importance of good light. And the Serious Readers HD Light has transformed how we read.
It replicates daylight, making every word crystal clear and reducing eye strain so we can read for longer.
For £150 off and free UK delivery of a Serious Readers HD Light, go to seriousreaders.com/backlisted and use the discount code BACK, B-A-C-K.
That's seriousreaders.com/backlisted with the code BACK. And even better, there's a 30-day risk-free trial.
Now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast which gives new life to old books. The old book featured in today's show is A Compass Error by Sybille Bedford, a dark and brilliant coming-of-age novel from 1968. I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher at Unbound.
And I'm Andy Miller, the author of The Year of Reading Dangerously. And today we welcome two new guests, both writers. Please welcome Krista Cowman and Francesca Rees.
Hello.
Hello.
Krista is a professor of history at the University of Leicester, where she researches the history of women's politics in 20th century Britain. Her books include Women of the Right Spirit, Paid Organisers in the Women's Social and Political Union, 1904 to 14. This is going to seem a really silly question, but given your career as a professor of history, do you like historical fiction or do you prefer to not read historical fiction?
I like historical fiction that wasn't written as historical fiction, if that makes sense. So I like reading, if I'm reading about the 1920s, I like reading books about the 20s that were written in the 20s, so that were contemporary literature at the time. I find it's a really good way to actually get a feel of a period.
Okay, is part of your brain thinking, usefulness, research, rather than escapism?
It's not actual, I'm going to research, so I'm going to sit down and read this book. But if I'm reading a book, I will often find something in it and think, that chimes, I'll just make a note of that. That's actually a useful way into this period.
So in terms of your historical period, recommend me a novel written in the era which would give me a flavour of that era.
If you're trying to understand Berlin in the 20s and 30s, Christopher Isherwood gets you more into it than any sort of weighty historical tome would do.
Very good. I love Christopher Isherwood, but now you've given me the belt and braces that it's actually
excellent.
It's actually teaching me something as well.
It's work.
Yeah. So, but you wouldn't therefore like Cabaret?
Oh. That's a leading question. Well, Cabaret is very closely based on the books, so I guess it sort of gives you a bit of a feel. And I do love the film, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'd use it with students necessarily.
Shall we agree then that Cabaret is an excellent document of the 1970s rather than the 1930s?
Yeah.
Hooray!
Yeah.
With one bound, we're three. Returning now to you, Francesca. Francesca Rees is a writer from North Wales. Her debut novel, Voyeur, was published by Tinder Press in 2021, followed by Glass Houses in 2024. She was the 2019 recipient of the Desperate Literature Prize for Short Fiction and has had work featured in the London Magazine, Banshee, Literary Review, LUK, and on BBC Short Works. After several years living in Paris, she is now based in London. Do you, like authors do, divide your time between Paris and London?
I was about to say, of course I don't do that. That would be so pretentious. But I am actually about to move back to Paris for 3 months.
Oh, right. Good.
It's what Sybille would want.
It is what Sybille would want, indeed. And if I were to read a novel about Paris, in any era, so it's not too tricky, do you have a favourite novel?
I mean, I have a favourite writer of Paris who is backlisted favourite, Patrick Modiano.
Yes.
So I'm kind of, preaching to the choir here, but I mean, St. Patrick, he's the best.
Nikki can edit this bit if she deems it irrelevant. Is Modiano still with us, or is he?
He's still going.
Yeah, amazing.
He is, right?
Yeah,
amazing.
He's still producing books. So.
Wow.
The book we're here to discuss is A Compass Error by Sybille Bedford, her third novel, first published in 1968 by William Collins, reissued in 2012 by Daunt Books in the UK and the New York Review of Books in the USA. The Daunt Books blurb runs as follows. As the Second World War looms, Flavia is living in a small village in the south of France. She studies for her Oxford entrance, swims in the sea, eats at local cafes, and lives with all the confidence and relish of youth. Drawn into the demi-monde of artists and writers, Flavia is awoken to the pleasures and complications of adult life. Her world is overturned when she becomes fascinated by André, beautiful, sophisticated yet manipulative, and is caught up in a devastating intrigue. In her introduction to the 2000 edition, Sybille Bedford herself writes, "What do I, the author, make of it? Now, as I am writing another 30 years on from another perspective, I am not Flavia. I do not know."
We'll be digging into this story and the remarkable career of Sybille Bedford over the next hour. But first of all, here's a message from our sponsors.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for this day.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
And we're back. And before we start on the main course, it's a good moment to mention that we'll be picking up elements of today's discussion in next week's Lot Listed, our show for patrons. You can subscribe for that at patreon.com/backlisted. And 5 years worth of superior book, film and music chat, plus ad-free early versions of the main show will be yours.
Right, to business. Professor Cowman, when did you first read A Compass Error by Sybille Bedford?
I read it in around about 1984 in the Virago Modern Classics edition. I was in my second year at university at the time and was just reading everything that Virago put out. I then lost it. I was a very careless reader in my 20s. I lost it. Somebody borrowed it or it went in a house move or something. And for years, I tried to get this book back. And because it is such a French book, I was convinced, being a careless reader, that it had a French author. And I spent years sort of working through Virago back catalogues and things, thinking, was it Marguerite Duras? Was it somebody else? Was it this person? Was it that person? Fast forward 20 years later, well, more than 20 years later, a colleague and friend of mine who at work, where I was working in Leeds at the time, said, "Oh, have you read this book, Quicksand? I think you'd really like it." Didn't really think anything of it, except the next day, a school gate friend of mine said, "Have you read this book, Quicksand? I think you'd really like it." So I started to read this book, Quicksand, and in the middle of it, it's like an absolute revelation. This is my book. This is my missing book, not Quicksand. But when she talks about her life in France, this is A Compass Error. I found it again. After all these years, I found my missing book.
Well, that's really interesting. Partly something we're going to talk about, isn't it? Which is that Sybille Bedford wrote and rewrote versions of her story or her characters' stories, or a bit of both, throughout her career. So it's fascinating that you picked up on the version that was published as memoir rather than fiction nearly 30 years after the publication of the one that was published as fiction rather than memoir. Francesca, forgive me, this sounds patronising, but you seem rather young to be interested in the work of Sybille Bedford.
This is like when my dad says to me, "How have you heard of Lou Reed?" Well, you're allowed to look into the past.
All right.
No, I have a great
Don't get humpy.
I have a great skincare routine. I'm 75.
Are you? Okay, yeah, okay. Well, tell us then, well, that's kidding aside, when did you first read Sybille Bedford's books or first come into contact with her work?
So funnily enough, I was also in second year of university. It must very much be the era of Sybille in a young woman's life. The year was 2012. I'll set the scene. I was living in a horrible little flat share in Whitechapel, and I was in a relationship with the boy I incorrectly believed to be my first love. I was a creature of great passions. And he had organised a holiday abroad, which was a complete novelty to me. I didn't realise that you could just sort of, go abroad if you felt like it. So it was very important to me that the reading material was perfect for this holiday. So I went to Scoob Books in Bloomsbury. I picked up Justine by Lawrence Durrell, hint, hint, another backlisted episode. And then on the way home, I popped into Daunt. And I am the living embodiment of why it's so important to get interested in the backlist and, republish these things, because I picked up the Daunt, the new edition of A Compass Era, which I think had just come out that year, maybe the year before.
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah, was immediately drawn in because, interwar, south of France, food, wine, all my things. And from that point onwards was just, my love affair with Sybille Bedford lasted considerably longer than my sweet formative relationship with that boy.
What is the percentage likelihood of that suitor listening to this recording?
I hope very low.
Okay.
He was reading a book about getting an MBA on the holiday, so I don't think he's into novels. Oh God, please don't let him listen now.
It's all right. He's our guest next week.
He was a lovely boy.
No, he isn't, everybody. That wasn't true. I'm going to ask you, John, because Sybille Bedford was alive and writing
Indeed.
well-known books when you were a bookseller in the 1980s and then a publisher in the 1990s. And I wondered whether you encountered her at any point.
Not to my memory, although she was definitely a presence. And she was one of those writers. I don't lump her, but I remember I was a bookseller the year that Jigsaw came out. And I remember that book, which was 89. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, it was shortlisted for the Booker, I think, in that year. And so she kind of occupied us in my pre-backlisted brain, a similar kind of place, like Anita Bruckner, I'm just disappointed to have to report Elizabeth Taylor, of women's writing that I was aware of but hadn't in fact read. And whereas, as backlisted listeners will know, I kind of caught up fairly quickly with Bruckner and Elizabeth Taylor, two now of my absolute favourite writers, and indeed Muriel Spark, who I think there's maybe some connection to as well. But I hadn't read until we did this. I have to confess, I had not read a single novel or autobiography of Sybille Bedford's, and yep, I'm happy to report once again an amazing kind of new world of really, really remarkable writing has been opened up. I want to go back and read all of them now.
Some of our listeners will be aware that we had a show recently about memoir and autobiography, and we had a very interesting discussion on Locklisted subsequently about what I think are the two most important questions to ask about any memoir or piece of autobiographical writing. Is it true? And does that matter? And Nikki and I have talked about in the past about we seem to keep coming back to this question, especially when we talk about travel writing, like the episode we did about Norman Lewis last year, or before that, Paul Theroux. I believe I'm absolutely correct in saying that Sybille Bedford and Norman Lewis knew one another, and I do see some connection there, but also that relationship between is it true, does it matter? I see Sybille Bedford's whole career as an exploration of those two questions, that whatever bit of the bookshop and a piece of work lived in, fundamentally it was, and I don't say this in faint praise, but fundamentally it was the same story told in a different way from a different angle. And she received some criticism of that in her lifetime. I I have to say that I knew little of Sybille Bedford's life when I read A Compass Error, and I think I enjoyed it more the less I knew. But for reasons, no, that's not again. It's not. But it's more because it was easier to see the fictional hand at work. Once you've listened to this episode, everyone, you will then detect the life in every single piece of Sybille Bedford's work. So what I'm trying to say is, as a novel, A Compass Error works as a really interesting novel in its own right. You don't have to be fully up to speed with Sybille Bedford's career in order to extract something really worthwhile from it. Now, Sybille Bedford, who seems in so many ways a quintessentially English writer, was born Sybille Alette Elsa von Schönebeck, and she was a German princess. I think that is correct in saying. But she always wrote in English, and we have a little clip of her here from her appearance on Desert Island Discs, talking about why she did that.
You wrote in English, having been brought up, as we heard, in Germany and Italy and France. Why do you choose English?
Immense love for the English language. I think the English language is one of the most marvelous instruments there is. It depends whom it suits, you see, and it's the possibility of concision, of taking liberties, of and this wonderful double thing, of the very, very simple fraction origins, the very complicated gibbonist styles. You can do all kinds of things. Simply English prose I find immensely exciting.
Krista, does Sybille Bedford read like somebody for whom English is not their first language?
I don't think A Compass Error reads like that at all. I think it's incredibly fluid in the writing. Very light in a way. She has a very, very light touch. Lightly is a word that she uses a lot adjectively in all of her works, actually. I never read it as someone that wasn't writing in English. And if I had thought about it, I would possibly have thought this is a French author. It certainly doesn't seem Germanic in its style. There's nothing heavy about it or convoluted.
Yes. Francesca, I detect there a kind of Nabokovian interest in the right word, the right phrase, that perhaps a non-English speaker, her style is nothing like Nabokov, clearly. But still, there's a kind of contemplation of each word, the weight of each word before it's chosen. What are the aspects of her style that spoke to you?
I think that's definitely true. You can really see the care with which she chooses, like sort of the agonizing care with which she chooses every word. But when you read it, it feels so effortless. I find she's very sensual, but she manages to, there's this sort of lightness of touch. Krista was talking about the French aspect of it. There is a kind of like, it's quite, not at all sparse, but it's not heavy. It's this lightness, as you were saying. It just kind of, it's effortless. All the effort, all the laborious effort that went into it is completely like absent when you read it, which I love.
John, I have two quotes here I'm going to ask you to comment on regarding Sybille Bedford. Catherine Hughes, writing in The Guardian, described her as the patron saint of writers who hate writing. The reviewer in The Spectator, reviewing Selina Hastings' recent biography of Sybille Bedford, described her as a gifted writer, but a monstrous snob.
Yes.
Now, I would like you to address those two aspects of Sybille Bedford's life and work, please.
Well, I mean, we love a writer who hates writing on the show, as you know, and Thomas Mann onwards. I think the thing that's really curious about Sybille Bedford, which I didn't know, is that was a very, very good journalist, very, in the kind of New York Times style Life magazine. She wrote an amazing account of the trial of Jack Ruby, the alleged assassin of Lee Harvey Oswald. She wrote a really powerful, moving piece about the Auschwitz trial as well. So
her account of the Profumo trial, for those of us
and Lady Chatterley as well,
and the Lady Chatterley trial, they are vital historical documents, in fact.
So you have this idea that she's a pro, right? She writes to word counts, to deadlines, and we all know what that's like. But then in her own writing, there are these sort of 4 novels and memoir. But as you say, they're so the life and the fiction is so deeply kind of knotted together. And you've already heard she obviously cares immensely about the rhythm and the weight of each sentence that she's writing in. It's almost like the writing that she wanted to do for herself. There's a little tiny bit in this book, which is just one paragraph, which gives you, I think, a brilliant sense of her own approach. It's Flavia, who is obviously cramming for her Oxford entrance exam, and she's trying to write essays. But she says the essay took all Wednesday, was all effort, anguish, agony. It meant writing, the real thing, and she experienced an almost physical impediment to commit a sentence to a blank page. The choice scared her. Nothing seemed good enough, nothing that could not be made clearer, better, richer. Thoughts, words, arrow strong, flew in all directions. They did not flow into sentences and paragraphs. I think that's brilliant description of what it actually feels like.
You know what? It is brilliant description, but it all simultaneously brings to my mind the old Twitter account, which was based on a plumber talking about plumbing, like writers talk about writing, right? Picking up the Thomas Mann thing. A plumber is a man
Someone
for
who
whom
finds
plumbing is more difficult than of other people. It's balls, isn't it? It's balls.
So
but anyway,
great.
Lovely. It's lovely for those of us gathered around this virtual table, all of whom struggle with it. I'm going to read you a paragraph from a brilliant essay, which you can probably find online in the New York Review of Books, by Hilary Mantel, which was written in 2001. I'm going to read you a paragraph, and then Krista, you respond to this paragraph from Hilary Mantel about those two sides of Bedford's personality as we see them in her fiction, her anguish over writing and her snobbery. Hilary Mantel wrote, Bedford's world is unashamedly elitist. Her most admired characters are aristocrats, sometimes aristocrats of beauty or wit rather than birth, but she prefers them if they are also the offspring of a distinguished family. The lower classes contribute much prized servants, treated sympathetically by both characters and author. It is the middle classes who are not quite human. They are gossips, often malicious and faintly ludicrous in their manners and morals. Her female protagonists are both beautiful and clever, with an economic freedom that allows them to escape the circumstances that generally constrict women's lives. But, like Jane Austen heroines, they are looking for men who will instruct them as well as amuse them, men whom they can look up to. A favourite of the Gods, which is the novel that precedes A Compass Error, is, as designed, a comedy of manners, but of the manners of people for whom we don't care quite enough. Yet its sequel, A Compass Error, with its compacted dramatic action, is a powerful and merciless book, a classic coming-of-age novel which visits on its heroine a series of humiliations that cut to the quick. Krista, I feel the reason why The Compass Error is so strong is because we, the readers, slightly feel our heroine is getting her comeuppance.
I think maybe we, the readers, feel that now. I think one of the really interesting things about this book to me is that it really changes for you the point in your life in which you read it. And it's very interesting the way she positions it as a writer, because she begins with Flavia, the older Flavia, looking back on her life and thinking, did I make a mistake? Maybe I didn't make a mistake. When I first read it, more or less the same age as Flavia. I just felt for her so much. I thought it was excruciating. When I read it 20 years later, I then thought she did get her comeuppance. When I reread it 20 years later again to come on this show, I thought, what are the adults doing here? Where's the safeguarding? Where's the responsibility?
It's like the Catcher in the Rye, right? Like you go, who's looking after Holden Caulfield? No one.
This child.
Yeah. Francesca, what do you think? Do you think the elitism, I think, is, these are weighted words, and snobbery is certainly a less kind word than elitism. Though even elitism isn't a particularly nice one, is it? But nevertheless, the elitism of Bedford's view of the role of the writer, the view of herself within society, do you think that adds a particular kind of energy to a compass error?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think without wanting to come out in favour of elitism, obviously I'm not, I think her hatred of the bourgeoisie is played to great comic effect in this novel. I mean, the Fourniers are like particularly repulsive creatures, and it's a delight to read sort of Rosette Fournier's kind of supercilious, gossipy, she's horrible.
Yeah.
And, obviously it's also a delight to take a holiday in the world of Sybille Bedford, this world of opera in Italy and Hock and Seltzer. I think that's one of the lines that I liked so much.
Hock and Seltzer, yes.
In the long run, I think her elitism was a great hindrance to her because, when we're talking about elitism in terms of this kind of godly role of the writer in society, I think that was what stopped her from producing more. She was the anti-Muriel Spark in so many ways. Muriel Spark would sit down at her typewriter and write and, produce thousands of brilliant novels or whatever, whereas Sybille would kind of agonize for years and spend too much time loving and dithering and eating. I mean, good for her. But
she liked, yes, we will come on to her love of food, which I'm sure
And
Mitch
wine.
could relate to, right?
Yeah.
I think the elitism comes through much more in her other books and in her memoirs. But I think in The Compass Error, apart from the way that the Fourniers are treated, which is, as Francesca says, is comedic and is very successfully so, I think Flavia is less dazzled by money and that sort of elite, but she has her own idea of the artistic world. That's what she's really, really drawn into, because there's a lot of depiction of Lulu and Therese's initial poverty and how they get out of that. They're not elite in the traditional sense, but they're this new interwar elite in a way, which is to do with being bohemian, being artistic, being fated and taken up. And that's what the Fourniers can't stand, because they're not in this world and they don't understand how these people got there when they've not got there with their respectability and their solid marriages.
Francesca, you mentioned Lawrence Durrell there. And God knows the lesson we learn from Durrell's work, and also the successful ITV show The Durrells, is that poverty is so much worse for the upper classes than it is for the little people. And there's a bit of that in Bedford, isn't there? I mean, the no one knows how ghastly it is living in this palazzo. My heart bleeds.
Having to sell your jewellery so you can go on holiday.
Anyway, I'm done revealing the chip on my shoulder yet again there. I apologise.
She's good on money, though. She's
good on money. We haven't actually read much from A Compass Error yet. And Francesca, I wonder if you could share with us a section that you particularly like or you feel is particularly revealing of Bedford's style.
So I've chosen this passage because I think in a very short word count, it kind of sums up what the whole book is about. The rest, the personal life, I shall never marry. The emotions, a delusion, wasteful indulgence, a futile cross. Emotions can be disregarded. Surely the personal life also is not necessary. So Flavia, 17, told herself at Chez Auguste, eating slowly, refilling her glass. Domination, jealousy, possessive love. In the world they lead to war, in private to confusion, misery, embarrassment. One can be civilized, one can be free. One will have friends, one will have lovers. These were part of Flavia's vision of the sensual life. disembodied future apparitions, urbane, agreeable, vague. What the sensual life spelt out for her most vividly were picnics, lobster salad, hock and seltzer, and going to the opera in Italy in summer.
Brilliant.
Okay, so I immediately want to ask Krista, when you were a youth, did you read that and think, that's the life for me, lobster in hock and seltzer?
Yes.
Yes.
Why not? Who wouldn't?
And do you know what? It never happened.
There's still time. There's still time for lobster, unless you don't
Isn't
eat lobster.
literature a letdown, guys?
Yeah, were you, seduced by the lifestyle described in that book?
I was seduced by Flavia's confidence, I think, more than anything. That she has great control of herself, and that's why it's so devastating when it all comes crashing down. And that's why she can seem insufferable as well, because there is this amazing self-confidence there. There's the wonderful scene at the party when she meets the mysterious Andre for the first time and goes on about the brandy, and then a little aside, it's Flavia had never drank brandy before, but she's the confidence that she has in carrying these things off, and on a first reading you're so taken up by it, and I think that's why when it all comes crashing down it is so devastating. And it's a lovely life that she has, and it's so simple the way that she compartmentalizes it. This is her idea of the sensual life, and then about 10 pages later on she begins her first love affair with Therese, and then she basically says, oh, and that's the sensual life sorted out. She's got that bit ticked off. She does her swimming, she's doing her reading, she's doing her lovely eating and drinking and being meticulous about it. It's very seductive.
Yes, I think for me the transition from youth to experience here is one from she's capable of sustaining the illusions of what her life will be like. And maturity is when you realise that illusion is not sustainable after all. And in terms of the writing, the depiction of the adolescent as someone who creates their own world, their own destiny, believes that it to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If they live it, they'll be it. I thought that was rather brilliant. Did you, Francesca? You are closer to adolescence than I am, arguably. My counsellor would say differently. But do you recognise that kind of? I've described it elsewhere as the will to be right. I think youngsters have a brilliant thing that they believe they must be right.
I don't recognise from my adolescence at all. I was still a big ball of anxiety who was convinced I was always wrong about everything. I think what I do recognise is this idea that you do have some kind of control over, that you can kind of plan the style of life that you're going to live. She's so naive thinking that she's going to be able to turn off emotions. That bit where she says emotions are unnecessary. It's this conviction that you have some kind of control over your life, which obviously, as she will soon discover, you really don't.
Also, that thing of, it's brilliant. Maybe high risk strategy to put a very, very long monologue where she tells her family story in the book. In I think it's chapter 3, presumably of her first sexual encounter, and she tells the story of her life and turns around and Therese is fast asleep, which is that kind of idea of not getting it right as a teenager.
We're going to return to that second half of this show, because that was something of a barrier to enjoyment for readers when the book was published. That there's a 50-page recap of the previous book, which was presumed to have been written in bad faith. I feel sorry for her reading the reviews, whereas she was trying for an effect, which it's debatable whether she succeeded, but that wasn't what she's trying to do. She's trying to retell, exactly as we've said before, a set of events from a different perspective. Anyway, before we go for our break, let's hear this is the dust jacket copy for the American first edition of A Compass Era, which was published by Knopf. And I will ask both our guests to rate it as a sales blurb. Had you been in a bookshop in New York in 1968 and you idly picked this up, would this have been for you? Flavia Herbert, on her own in the south of France during a golden summer in the 1930s, lives with the supreme directness and ardour of youth. She knows with a fierce certainty what her future is to be. It lies at Oxford, where she will train her intellect to be of service to mankind.
Triggering, very triggering. Yeah.
I've put the book down and wandered off, by the way, at that point. But this view of herself is at odds with the reality. It springs from the ideas she has of her dead and idolised father, of her beautiful mother, Constanza, the favourite of the gods. Flavia does not know herself as she is. When she is caught up in the crucial turning of her life, the drama, the intrigue, that is to determine the fate of those she most loves, her actions are as mysterious to herself as they are to others. Is she the victim of a mere compass error, this serious, vulnerable girl moving among her manipulative and seductive elders? Or is she indeed working out the pattern of her essential nature? That is the substance and suspense of this novel, in which elegance and a true worldliness overlie the strongest moral concern.
I should at this juncture reveal that I was a bookseller and I always used to select A Compass Error as my Pride Month staff pick, and I used to try and sell it as a Riviera lesbian thriller.
Now listen, I'm gonna pick you up on Riviera, okay, lesbian, absolutely, thriller.
It's thrilling.
Well, you've been up the Hock and Seltzer, I would suggest, but okay. But as a blurb, I think that's a good blurb, Francesca. You think that's a good jacket copy?
I mean, there's a mistake in it. Isn't the book set in the 20s?
It is set in the 20s, yeah.
So, I mean, that's the biggest clanger for me, I think. That was the moment where I kind of...
in the 30s,
It's like,
Krista, what do you think?
I think the second bit of the blurb kind of nails it. The first bit, I agree. I'd wandered off with you at that point, Andy. I wouldn't have been gripped. But
we're in New York in 1968, not standing around
reading this.
Oxford, not another Oxford.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I like the idea that John, that jacket copy was not afraid to present the pleasures of the book as fundamentally intellectual.
Yes, there is a lot of intellectual stuff in it. There's a passage I might read later about the pessimism of Costanza, Flavia's mother, which I think is really powerful. But it's very good on all the sensual details. I mean, I think that's the thing that probably, having listened to Krista and Francesca, it's the sensual details that kind of live with you. And also that kind of the Rebecca moment, where you have that, oh my God.
Let's stop there. When we come back, we'll be hearing from our old pal, Cyril Connolly.
Hey! Where would we be without Cyril?
And we'll be talking about that oh my God moment. But first of all, let's hear from our sponsors.
New Vitamin Water Zero Sugar Pineapple Passion Fruit is packed with vitamins. Just like the amount of peas we packed in that sentence. It's packed like your tote bag. The one you stole from your ex. Or your overpriced half a studio apartment. Or extra rushed rush hour traffic. Packed like your calendar. Triple booked at 5, of course. Grab a Vitamin Water. Did we mention it's packed with vitamins?
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
And we're back. We're talking about Sybille Bedford's 1968 novel, Compass Error, her third novel. I have here a contemporary review from the Times Literary Supplement. This was written by Cyril Connolly, the great Cyril Connolly. And I'll just read you the first and last paragraphs of this. This is sort of indicative of the book's reception, which was mixed at the time. I could have found better reviews and I could have found significantly unkinder reviews, but this seemed to me to be a good representative of them all. He writes, "A dozen years or so ago, when Mrs. Bedford's first novel, A Legacy, was published, it met with the kind of distinguished approval which meant that the literary establishment, even if not the general public, had taken her to its bosom. Evelyn Waugh, Nancy Mitford, and others who spoke rather than wrote their enthusiasm acclaimed a new classical talent and spoke of Proust, Thomas Mann, Henry James, the elegant, cool, witty sparkle of Mrs. Bedford's prose, the controlled intricacy of her plot. Her only subsequent work of fiction, to which A Compass Error is a sequel, appeared in 1963. The praise, if less unanimous, was still keen. But 5 years is a long time nowadays in the checkered fashions of fiction, and however much one tries to preserve some sort of constant long-term judgment for novelists who do not choose to work in the current mainstream, Mrs. Bedford's new novel does seem curiously irrelevant, dated, and mannered. A book to please the author's own generation, certainly, but not, alas, likely to provoke either the new literary establishment or the younger reading public to great enthusiasm, nor one to reaffirm those high-flown hopes which A Legacy inspired. Were it not for the fact that Mrs. Bedford, between her rare novels, writes excellent documentary books largely concerned with the moral intricacies of the law, it would be tempting to think she was not aware of the ironies behind this cool, vanished world. It is perhaps a pity that in Flavia's story one feels too little sympathy with any of the characters to care deeply about their moral intricacies, and despite the very real and skillful pleasures offered by the author's sophisticated style and background descriptions, it is fair to conclude that none of it has much relevance for most of us more humdrum human beings. Not unkind, but
damning with faint praise, isn't it, of the most...
Francesca, you probably sold more copies of A Compass Error in your time as a bookseller than it sold on publication. Because we talk a lot about this, don't we? The right book at the wrong moment. That's got to be an example of it, has it? And we were making a joke about it there, about being in New York in 1968. To the generation of 1968 who perceived that they had lived through a revolution already, what couldn't they see in this novel, do you think?
On the surface, it's kind of prissy and posh, or, sort of like, interwar 20s posh people, but it's actually it's quite a radical novel, I think. I mean, not just in terms of its theme, but also sort of in style and form. I think it's quite radical. I mean, I'm sure at one point we're going to talk about the controversial soliloquy in the middle of the book.
That's the climax to which we're building in this show. But so let's not go too early. No spoilers. But yes, so I think it's certainly a nastier book than in a good way than that review of Connolly's would suggest.
Yeah, I also think it was a bit rich that Connolly was talking about the more humdrum among us. I mean, he was hardly, Joe Bloggs living in suburbia, was he?
I love
it. Even in 1968, though, Cyril Connolly understood the need to present yourself as a man of the people, right? Absolutely.
He was code switching.
Oh, yes, that's good. Oh, that's good. Cyril Connolly was code switching. That's a phrase that's never been uttered by any human ever.
He was supposed to be her friend as well. That's That's the real.
Well, literary
I know.
friendships are treacherous, as John Mitchinson and I know.
Yes.
Krista, you, I know, wanted to read from a section near the end of the book, which this seems like a good moment because of the civilized savagery that's on display here. Is relevant to what we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, this is from a passage that she's begun a relationship with Andre, and then she's discovered that Andre has a purely ulterior motive, which is to disrupt Flavia's mother's relationship with her new boyfriend, soon to be husband, except not to be husband, because it transpires that Andre is actually the boyfriend's wife who refuses to divorce him. And obviously when Flavia discovers this, she's devastated, but then she still finds Andre incredibly seductive. This comes after several chapters where Andre has been taking her out, asking her questions, hanging on the answers, really seeming to enjoy her company. And then she turns on her, and it's devastating. You look disapproving. Time you were told a few facts of life, you slobbering little moralist. Behave better, she mocked Flavia's voice. Isn't that all to the good? Time you learned a thing or two about your own behaviour. I've been longing to tell you some home truths. God, how fed up I was with having to flatter you. I knew you had more rough than smooth. It wasn't what everybody would call flattery. I did it in my style. But wasn't my attention flattering enough? Pretending to take you seriously, listening to you, throwing you scraps about politics and Saint-Simon. Do come and talk to me, she mocked her own voice. Don't underrate yourself. You fell for it, didn't you, you conceited little fool? You thought that I chose to talk to you, chose to spend evening after evening with you. The pretensions you have, I imagine you got those from your precious mother. What a pair you must make. Andre laughed. But I suppose you can't see yourself as others see you. The adventurous, the divorcee. I hear your father couldn't wait to kick her out without house or home or country. Flavia said, I'm going to hit you. I'd hit you if you weren't a woman. You mean, Andre said, if you weren't a woman. You really must get these things straight. Society may accept women going to bed together, but not fistfights, dear. Ever.
Brilliant.
Oof. Queen, as I believe we say these days.
Yeah. Positively 4th Street, isn't it?
Krista, I like to think that you and your daughter go through similar conversations.
Oh, we do, every day.
Do you? Good.
Yes.
Good. That speaks to a different generations. Yeah.
It does.
John, did you find when you reached that section that Krista's just read for us? I wanted to. My insides were clenching with not embarrassment for Flavia, but the awful truth telling going on there.
Yeah.
And it was really gripping, talking about it as a thriller. Did you find that?
It reminds me of that, the great Rebecca moment, loved her, I hated her. And then you suddenly realise that what Andre has been doing has been incredibly calculated, and she's drawn out all of that kind of youthful splurging, which we already know because we've had the soliloquy in bed with the snoring Therese. It's why I really like this book, is it's going back to your talking about adolescence before, it really captures that sense of joyousness, of wanting to tell your life story and wanting everybody. It's that we've all had it, that annoying thing of you ask somebody, tell me about your family, and then you're half an hour later they're going, and then of course then it wasn't quite like that, because then actually my dad wasn't really my dad, and then and you think, I was just being polite, to be honest. I think there's a thing here which is not to be underestimated in this book, is the shadow of war. I found reading it right now incredibly interesting and moving, because The sense of people kind of just having lives while this shadow is growing and creeping over them, I think is brilliantly realised.
I would just remind listeners of the future, if indeed there is one, that we're recording this in early March 2025 while the world is going up in flames.
There's a little passage in the book talking about compass errors, right? Which perhaps if I could read, it's in the soliloquy, but it's the bit that really jumped out for me, which was Costanza explaining her pessimism. And this is the pessimism of the late 20s. This is the pessimism to put alongside the positivism of Miss Jean Brodie, teaching in Edinburgh and admiring Mussolini. Her mother is half Italian and is in, reflecting. And she's also, Costanza's also a socialist. She's American, half Italian. The future of human society, had it made an irrevocably false start, the compass error that gets harder to correct with every mile you go. How simple and shining it had all looked when she was young and Mama was preaching democracy and she went one better with her faith in Fabian socialism. The influence of private individuals on events was negligible, and yet they must keep on. One thing I learnt in England, this is the mother, public opinion, the sum of private opinions does matter, can matter often for good. How did we get into the situation of today? Economic bewilderment in the United States, uninspired government in Britain, unemployment, gloom, insuperable problems everywhere, unspeakable things happening to men and women inside half the countries in the world. In our poor Italy, on a comparatively petty scale, she said, think of Soviet Russia. Yet never make the mistake, Flavia, never take lightly the one man in the prison cell. She believed that there would be changes, a new cycle of prosperity. Mussolini will fall. But when? How? What about the people to whom it will have cost perhaps a third of their lifetime? What about our tendency to slide into the next trap? Do we know our true needs, she asked herself? Are we inescapably the products of our habits and environments? Are we not already too many, simply too many, to be able to change the patterns deliberately? Who should begin? Quis custodiet? It is hopeless. Constance, some things have become better. What do you think are good, entirely good? The rule of law? Yes, she said, where it obtains. What else? The Kellogg Pact? She said, the invention of anesthetics, the abolition of judicial torture, where it obtains. And that would get us back to Castor Oil and the secret police, Lenin's kulaks and the cattle trains, Devil's Island, English prisons, Oscar Wilde, crime, ends and means, free will, character, what makes it, what destroys it, conduct. She would speak of the necessity of holding on to a framework of belief, a reasonable percentage of belief. One thing she often came back to was what she called the great divide in all individuals' lives. Youth, when death has no reality. She doesn't mean fear of death. Children can have that. And our actions and pleasures are for their own sake, for what they are now and new. Middle age, when the fact of death, impermanence, and our own slackening of impetus is the dominant, the chief changing the notations, the chef changing the notation. What we do for the nth time. What will it add up to? We are concerned then with the sum, not the parts. What is achievement? Art, undoubtedly. Religious experience, outside her range. Science, for what ends? Increasing human happiness, another chancy one that. And for the 99 without a vocation? Pessimism, she affirmed, is to her the most rational view, the long-term view. In the present, she mostly enjoyed herself, or had so far. I've been sad so often, yet from day to day, I've enjoyed everything that was going. Mummy, I said, in your whole life, what have you enjoyed most? Hunting, I suppose.
They're an extract from the Riviera lesbian thriller, Compass Error.
I just think it feels very, very, very contemporary, that worldview, pessimism.
That's depressingly wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry.
Rich. We talked a little bit earlier about Sybille Bedford as the patron saint of writers who hate writing. And here's another clip from her appearance on Desert Island Discs where she addresses that.
I don't write at all freely. I write with enormous difficulty, and it's almost a physical labor because I write every sentence over and over and over again. It's more like picking up stones, paving stones, and fitting them together.
Well, let's see if a landscape gardener feels the same way about that. Nevertheless, I think you can see the benefits of that approach in A Compass Error. I'm going to read a little bit in a minute that struck me as a magnificent piece of writing. But first, let's turn to the much trailed soliloquy. Quite early in this novel, as John has said, Flavia delivers a 50-page recap while lying in bed with Therese, which struck reviewers at the time as clumsy at best. And indeed, Bedford many years later said, well, I knew what I was trying to do, words to this effect, but I didn't quite pull it off. It didn't bother me at all. In fact, I rather liked the boldness of it. Krista, what do you think is happening in the flow of the novel when you deliberately, seemingly pause it to recap? What's she actually doing there, do you think?
I think for the reader, it's actually quite useful on a first reading. I have to say, particularly for the Virago edition, because they didn't republish A Favourite of the Gods, which was the precursor. And it does leave you with so many, if you don't have this bit, you have so many questions in here. Why is Flavia there? Why is she on her own? Why is her mother so important to her? Where's her mother gone? Why are they even in France? Why aren't they still in Italy? Where does she come? So to me, it fills in a lot of the gaps, and I think it's really useful. What you were saying about Bedford's writing and what she says herself about pushing it down and taking it up and pushing it down and taking it up. When you've read the whole volume of work, both the fictionalized and then the two memoirs, you see that actually a lot of what she's doing is retelling and retelling and retelling, and maybe in the retelling, telling it differently, maybe making it better. And the thing that's really sad about it when you've read the other things, of course, is that you realize that Costanza, the mother figure, is actually not this bright, glittering favourite of the gods. At the point at which they're in Sanary, she is a rather tragic drug addict, sending her much younger boyfriend and her daughter off in cars all over the Riviera to find chemists where they're not known so they can score heroin for her. And so then it becomes really, really sad, because Constanza, as she's written here, is this glittering heroine and this amazing relationship she has with Flavia. Flavia is trying to tell Therese that she is important as well. She is exotic in the way that Therese's family are exotic. She has this wonderful backstory. And there's a moment at the very end when Flavia can't bear it. She discovers that Therese has slept through all of this, and she flings herself out of the room, bursts into tears, and then goes and has a bath, and then thinks, oh, poor Therese, it doesn't matter actually. And I shouldn't have said it in English anyway, because she doesn't really speak English very well. So she kind of comes, it's almost self-realization, but Flavia doesn't do self-realization, does she? It's the closest she gets.
I love that idea, Krista, what you were saying about, as a reader, approaching Bedford's work over a number of years, including this book. I've said this before, but she does strike me as a classic example of an author who, when you've read all of her books, you've read one of them, rather than the other way around. But that's the point, isn't it? It's like a multi-part work, written at different life points in different ways from different perspectives. Francesca, could we just go back to the pesky soliloquy in A Compass Error? Did you feel it's important we hear, even if Therese doesn't, Flavia's account, Flavia's version, the effect on Flavia of events that have taken place in the previous novel, so we can then better understand how she responds to what's going to happen to her in the rest of A Compass Error?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Without wanting to sound fickle, I've actually been very converted in favour of the soliloquy in this brief exchange. The first time I read the novel, like you, I thought it was great. I mean, I didn't feel particularly negative about it. It was only when I reread it that I just thought, oh God, she's just rehashing Favour of the Gods, because by that point I'd read it. But I think what Krista said about it's so important because it's Flavia desperately trying to signal that she's of the same kind of ilk as Therese and Lulu and all that kind of gang.
Yeah.
So I think that is actually really what it's for. And yeah, you're right. You know, if anything, it's actually quite French. You know, we were saying before about how she's quite a French writer. You know, it's kind of like Annie Ernaux is constantly writing the same novel again and again and again. So maybe I've actually been a bit harsh on the soliloquy. I also think it's interesting. It's odd and it's jarring, but it makes the novel richer because, you know, so many great novels have odd, jarring, 75-page protracted moments.
I think that's what you said, though, Andy. I think what she's done is she sort of knows that she has to have that material in the book. So she's got a technical problem, speaking as a plumber now again. So you got
a really hard technical problem, right? Yeah.
But she's trying to turn that technical problem into something that is important in this book, in the development of the self-awareness of the character of Flavia.
Yes.
She realizes that she's oversplurged in the wrong language, and she's Therese, and then she has a moment, and then and you know, she is preparing for the. I mean, I think Andre is. I mean, one of the most dramatic reality arrivals of the reality principle that I've read in fiction in recent years. I mean, it's, you know, the Flavia after she has been torn apart really by is not quite the same. She's, you know, she is, as they say, immediately a little older and a little wiser and a little less trusting and a little less self-obsessed.
Well, as eagle-eared listeners of the eagle-eared, bat-eared listeners of this podcast will have spotted. I wouldn't really like to go for a drink with Sybille Bedford, but to be fair, she would definitely not like to go for a drink with me. Dreadful little middle-class oik that I am. But nevertheless, there was a section of writing in here which I think is staggeringly good, and my writer's brain tells me this must have been worked and reworked, but it proves it was worth it. The novel starts with a section called Prologues, in which a 50-year-old Flavia, who has gone on to be a writer, is asked questions, and she muses in a very Sybille Bedford-like way about what happened. In fact, what she is musing about is, was it true and does it matter? That's how the novel starts, asking the reader and the author's proxy, you know, my version of telling this story, was it true, does it matter? The version I'm about to tell, was it true, does it matter? She's circling those two questions all the time. And she then cuts to the young Flavia herself. And what I'm going to read you, it's a very short passage, but I would like you to think about the idea of Sybille Bedford doing something terribly clever here, in my opinion, which is dramatizing in 3 short paragraphs the birth of consciousness of a writer, the process of understanding that choosing words in a particular combination as opposed to another combination creates a wildly different set of effects. And to do that while simultaneously introducing you to the character of young Flavia seems to me incredibly clever and a really accomplished and sophisticated piece of writing. Anyway, here it is. Chapter 1, A Day. The clarity of those mornings of spring and early summer, the second year at St. Jean, the sense of peace, slow time, the long day to come, the summer, the year, the years. Wide windows, not yet shuttered at that hour, opened from the circular whitewashed room on slopes of olives and the distant shimmering bay. The air, still light and cool, already held the promise of the dry, unwavering heat of noon. Flavia turned 17, alone, entirely alone for the first time in her life, was at the long table stacked and neat with books. She was working, playing at work, hard at work, immersed, yet alert to hour and place and her own joy. She read, marked a passage, attempted a summary, 6 key words and a date, handled another book with deliberation and pleasure in pursuit of that magic right across reference, read on. All was grist, discovery. If speculation delighted, so did concrete fact, infinity and bureaucracy, appearance and reality, the tree or non-tree in the quad. That's absolutely brilliant, can I just say?
It's really
non-tree. My God, have the day off.
Yeah.
Brilliant. The supply of drinking water on the road marches of Imperial Rome. What? It's insane segue, but brilliant. So good. How rich the world, how interesting. I am learning. There is no end to learning. Application, one foot before the other. This is the door of the feast, and today is as good as tomorrow. That is exceptionally brilliant writing, in my opinion. It dramatizes about 3 or 4 things simultaneously, including the manner of its own creation. The picking up and putting down of a specific word, a phrase, an image. It's so good. And it's for that I feel so grateful to you both for suggesting that we read this book. Like I say, she's not on my virtual Christmas card list, but again, it's irrelevant, isn't it? It doesn't matter. I mean, when you're faced with something as good as that, it really, really doesn't matter.
Okay, so I'm afraid that's where we must end things. Huge thanks to Krista and Francesca for bringing us to Bedfordshire, and to our producer, Nikki Birch, for making us all sound like we're in the same room.
If you want show notes with clips, links, and suggestions for further reading for this show and the 234 that we've already recorded, please visit our website at backlisted.fm. And if you want to buy the books discussed on this or any of our other shows, visit our shop at bookshop.org and choose Backlisted as your bookshop.
And do please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/backlisted. Remember, if you subscribe at the lock listener level, you get 2 extra exclusive podcasts every month. The next one will feature Andy, Nicky and I talking about this show and recommending other books, films and music we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight. People who subscribe at this level also get their names read out like this. Ian Henderson, thank you. Aoife Martin, thank you. Miriam Chotner-Gardner of the very excellent 3 Lives bookshop in Greenwich Village, New York. Thank you, Miriam. Rohan Mateson, thank you. Claire Barrow, thank you.
Jennifer Taylor, thank you very much. Gabriella Levy, thank you. Susan Davey, thank you. Wendy Como, thank you. Sonia N. Fair, thank you so much. But before we go, is there anything else, Krista, that you would like to add about this book or the life and work of Sybille Bedford that you feel we haven't covered?
I think we didn't touch a lot on her food writing and her wine writing, which is extraordinary. And when we're talking about how carefully she chooses her words, she chooses her wine and her food equally as carefully and describes that choice in a wonderful, sensual parcel that she serves up for you. So if you're hungry, give it a read.
She was a contemporary and friend of both Elizabeth David and our former backlisted subject, MFK Fisher, wasn't she? So she's very much in that top tier, surprise, surprise, of food writing and connoisseurship of that era. Yes, okay, so there's the food and the drink. Francesca, is there anything else you would like to say about Sybille or her work that we have?
There is indeed. I have 2 things. The first was that as much as I came to Sybille for the food and the drink and the sensual delight, I do actually think that it's a really dark book. And we touched briefly on Sybille's mother's morphine addiction. And I actually kind of think in a way this book is sort of about addiction in a kind of very veiled way, because Flavia is so powerless to resist the power. She's almost like an addict when it comes to her relationship with André. And it did remind me a lot of the way that she writes about her mother's addiction in Jigsaw. Her morphine is prescribed to her by, we also have to mention the name of this guy, Dr. Joyeux, which I think is too good. Which in turn...
Yeah.
So there was that, but it is the sort of innate darkness of the book. And then the one final thing is that if we haven't persuaded everyone to go in and read the entire sort of, oeuvre of Sybille Bedford, and they just want to dip their toe in, there's an excellent and very short essay when she writes about Martha Gellhorn and delivering a car to her in Capri just after the Second World War, and how she basically gets so drunk the night before that she manages to crash the car on the way to Capri. And it's an absolute rollicking, good, fun essay. So I would recommend that if ever someone wants to have a little taster, a little amuse-bouche, as I'm sure Sybille would say.
Sybille would say, yes, if you want a glass of plonk, that's the one to... That's the one to sample. Good. Okay. Mitch, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I had a lovely little story of Victoria Glendinnings's about who was a huge fan of hers. But you get both sides, I think, of Sybille Bedford here, the charm and the not so charming. She spoke softly and very fast, as if there were no time to say everything she had to say. She was outspoken. Once when she came to our house, I'd set out opaque wine glasses, relics of Casa Pupo, a modish 1970s emporium in Pimlico. As I came to pour the wine, she put her hand out and stopped me. Give me a clear glass. I simply cannot drink wine out of this. When she was far into her 80s, I encountered her at a party and asked her conventionally how she was. I'm in love, she replied, suddenly radiant, a girl. Translated into her work, it was this discrimination and this fierce appetite for life that made Sybille Bedford the great writer she was. I think that's lovely.
I think that's great. Well, listen, thank you so much, Francesca and Krista, for bringing this to the Backlisted table. I think John and I both really, really enjoyed this in ways we weren't expecting to.
So true, so true.
That sounds like I'm too much with the backhanded compliments today.
Sybille would be proud, yeah.
Sybille would have approved.
She would have approved.
Okay, well, listen, if any ex-lovers of Francesca or Sybille's or mine are listening to this, we apologise for the inconvenience.
Sorry for everything.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks ever so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.